Welcome to U-Wrench. Today we're going to be replacing the front brake caliper on the Mark V Grand Caravan. So we're going to be going from this to this. So we've got some work to do to get our new caliper fitted. Let's jump right in. So as you can see, we have the car lifted and the wheel removed, so we're ready to make a start. Now, there's only one really important thing that you need to bear in mind really when it comes to the brakes on these particular vehicles. And that's the simple fact that there are actually two different versions of the brakes on the Grand Caravan. First of all, you have the standard version of the brakes, and there's a second version that are called heavy duty brakes. Now, it doesn't really matter which of those two versions that you have, because the basic process is virtually identical. And if you're unsure which version of the brakes you have on your particular car, then we have produced another video that will show you how to easily determine which version you have. Again, there'll be a link to that in the video description. So now we've covered that one important point, let's get the job done. So first part of the job, before we remove any of these brake components, what we want to do is get a wheel nut and put it on your wheel bolt that's closest to the 12 o'clock position. And the reason for that is when we start disassembling these brake components, there is a chance that your brake rotor could fall from the vehicle, and obviously that could cause injury. So if you put that little wheel bolt on as close to the top as possible, that's going to stop that from happening. Now you can make this job a little bit easier for yourself. If you've lifted the entire front of the car rather than just one corner, you can turn the steering wheel and actually turn this outwards. So it's going to give you much better access to the rear of our caliper here. Now that's not essential, you can still do it with the caliper in the straight position like it is now, but we're going to go ahead and turn our steering wheel, move this out. That's going to give you guys a better view of the back as we work on this caliper. So our brake caliper is essentially made of two components. We have this central section just here and these two little arms that come off the end. That's the brake caliper itself. And then this little section here, which actually comes around the front, just there, that's the caliper bracket. And the thing that holds these two components together, we have two pins with bolts on the end just here. They're actually slider pins. We'll show you this later in the video. And then the only thing that's holding this whole caliper on to the car, we have two large bolts, top and bottom at the back here. And those two bolts are actually connecting our caliper bracket directly to the knuckle on the car. This center section, the actual caliper itself, is actually free to move backwards and forwards. The first thing we need to do is to separate our caliper from our caliper bracket. We're going to be doing that by removing these two bolts. So to make the removal of these components easier, I'm going to soak all of the bolts and fixings in a bit of penetration spray. I'll be using a PB Blaster, but there are hundreds of different versions of this on the market, and WD-40 do a good penetration spray as well, and that's quite cheap on Amazon. I'll add links to that in the video description for you. But what this penetration spray does, when you put it on a fixing, actually helps to soak in. It can get in behind the heads and actually get into the start of the threads as well. So if you've got a particularly stubborn fixing, if you soaked it with some of this for 5 or 10 minutes before you try and attack it, it can sometimes make the job a heck of a lot easier. So it's definitely worth not missing this step. So just put a little bit on these bolts here at the top and at the bottom. You can do exactly the same on the caliper bracket bolts at the rear here. Just a little bit above each of those fixings. So for the removal of these little bolts that we have on the end, one thing to note is when we start undoing these, there's a possibility that this section here with the rubber boot and this little head just here can start to twist with it. Now you'll notice if you look carefully, this has a flat section on it. So if this does start to twist, you can just grab yourself a spanner, slot it on there and counter hold as you undo on the end here. But usually, especially if these brakes have been on here for a while, as these has, you should be able to remove that without this moving, but be sure to keep an eye on that. If it does start to move, make sure you counter hold it. Exactly the same at the top. And just for safety, just going to hand tighten that back in a couple of turns just so it can't fall off. Very unlikely, this has been on here for a while, but just for safety. So now we're going to be removing our caliper, and when we remove this, we don't want to leave it hanging on our flexible brake hose here. So obviously that could damage the hose and also damage where it connects, so we do want to be a little bit careful with this. So when we lift this off, we actually want to hang it up and out of the way. So I've got myself a long cable tie here. So when we lift this up carefully, we're just going to make sure that we're not twisting the hose in an incorrect direction. I'm just going to lift it up and put it up out of the way. I could tie it up here or possibly up to the spring up here. So let's remove my little bolt again. So now this is free to be removed. And what will be holding it on is actually going to be slightly clamping our brake pads in the centre. And what we're hoping is that we don't have too much force, and so we can kind of wiggle this and get this out. Sometimes these are quite hard, so we may need to compress the pistons that are in there a little bit, but we'll try removing it as it is first of all. So now for the removal of the caliper, just want to give it a bit of a pull, top and bottom on these little arms here, and see how easy or hard it feels like it's going to be to remove. This one doesn't feel too bad. We've got movement here. Yeah, so there it is. So this one will definitely be able to come off. Now if yours is a little bit sticky, then what you can sometimes do is actually compress the pistons back in a little bit. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. So the first thing you can do, if yours is a little bit sticky, just grab the caliper from the rear and just pull it forward using some body weight. Don't go crazy. You just want to compress those calipers just 1 or 2 millimeters. The other thing you can do is, if yours is really stuck, grab yourself a long, decent flathead screwdriver, and we've got that little gap. This is the rotor right here. We've got this gap, because it's a vented rotor, in the middle. So you can put your screwdriver in there and lever just against our little edge here, and use that just to try and get yourself an extra couple of millimeters. Make sure you do the same on the top and the bottom, so you're moving both of those pistons if you've got the heavy duty ones like we have here. Plus if you get really stuck, you can normally get an extra couple of millimeters just by levering it with a good screwdriver. So now hopefully we're at a stage where we can just slide this caliper off over the brake pads. So now we need to tie this up. So I think to keep this straight, I'll lift it up this way, and I've got a nice point here. I think I'll tie this up to this spring up here, try and get it as high as I can and out of the way. So next we're going to remove our brake pads, which are just here. As you can see, these don't actually have very much wear on them, but they are actually sticking in these calipers, which is why they're being replaced. Although they haven't had much wear, they are actually quite old. And I'm trying to push them out. As you can see, they're pretty well jammed in there, just as I suspected. So I'm going to grab a tool and get these removed. Now you should be able to push these out by hand, but I can't, so I'm just going to grab my screwdriver here. I'm going to put it on this little flat edge here. I'm just going to give it a bit of a tap with the rubber mallet. I just want to get this started here at the top, and then likewise at the bottom. Now I've got this opened up, I can put a flathead screwdriver in. It's a little tip for you, especially if you intend to keep your old rotors. I'm going to put this in and try and lever this out. Don't lever in this direction, because this will force the bottom of the screwdriver into the face of your rotor. Instead you want to move in this direction. The pads are definitely being replaced, these are scrap, so we don't mind if we damage the face of the pads. Don't really want to damage the face of the rotor, especially if you are of course going to be reusing it. These are pretty well stuck in there. If yours gets stuck in, a little tip for you, rather than keep forcing it, is to actually rewind it and then do it again. You should get it a little bit further each time. As you can see, our pads were particularly stubborn. This is exactly why I said that they're locking and jamming up, even though they look relatively new. So I'm going to do exactly the same here on the other side. Hopefully you should just be able to pull yours out by hand. Obviously in this situation we can't. So with our pads out of the way, it's now time to remove our caliper bracket. And to do that we have 2 bolts holding it on at the rear here. One here, one here. They can vary, sometimes they're size 21, these are size 19. And just for the sake of speed, I'm going to be putting the air gun on these. If you don't have that, of course, you can just use a standard breaker bar or a decent length wrench. And we just screw that back in so we don't want it to fall off, and then do the other one. So I'm holding this on now. There's only these 2 bolts that are holding it on. Remove those 2 and we can just lift our bracket away from the car. So next we're going to take a look at preparing our brand new caliper. And the one that we have here just so happens to be AutoShack. This is a fairly inexpensive one on Amazon. For example, you can buy a pair of these calipers. The standard versions are $120, or the heavy duty ones that we have here about $145. But remember, that is for the pair. And you can also buy them separately, and they're a little bit more than half that price. And as with all of the parts that we're going to be showing in this video, we will be adding Amazon links into the video description for you. Let's go ahead and get this opened up. Here's the new caliper, and it does come complete with the new clips, and also brand new banjo bolt with the washers. Now, whenever you replace your brake caliper, you definitely will also want to replace the flexible brake hose. The reason for that is, just like your calipers, these things do age, and what can happen with these is they tend to get clogged up with dirt or corrosion or debris, and then once they are clogged up, they almost act like a one-way valve. Imagine for a second this is the hole that's in the pipe. Over time, if that gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, then it's harder to push that fluid through. However, because it's a hydraulic system, when you put your foot on that brake pedal, it will force it through even the very, very tiniest of holes. However, when you release your foot off that brake pedal, you don't have hydraulic pressure pushing it back, you just have the kind of relaxing of the system. And often that's not enough to push that fluid back out. So what can happen if these hoses start to go is you actually start to lock up your calipers. Your brake pads get locked onto the rotor and they can't release properly. And of course, these brake lines are a lot cheaper than our calipers. These are about $15 on the driver's side, a little bit more expensive, about $24 for the passenger side. But they're a lot cheaper than your calipers, and so definitely, if you're doing a new caliper, definitely do this at the same time. Let's take a look at the new hose again. We'll add links for these for both sides of the vehicle in the video description for you. So there's the brand new hose, and again, this also comes with 2 new washers. Now, of course, this can be fitted in various different directions. So what you want to do is look at your old one, note where your bleed nipple is, and look at the way that this is actually connected to your caliper. I've just checked the old one, and this is exactly the setup that we have. It's coming to the rear of the caliper here, and this curves towards the side with the bleed nipple, like that. Then we want to remove the plug from the new caliper. And with these washers, you actually want one either side of the hose here. So you want one underneath, and the second one goes on the top. So you want the first one here, second one onto the bolt, feed the bolt through, making sure you've got your orientation correct. And that goes in there like that. So you've got a copper washer both above and below this square block section. So now we're going to grab our torque wrench and torque this up to the correct spec, which is 24 Newton meters, which is 18 foot-pounds. So next we're going to separate our caliper from the caliper bracket. The bolts on here are size 14, and again, just keep an eye on these sections here. If it starts to turn, you can counter hold. They shouldn't do, being brand new, but if you need to counter hold, you can counter hold there. Get this removed. So next we need to look at preparing our caliper brackets to accept the brake pads. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're fitting a brand new caliper, as we are today, or whether you're using the old one. It makes no difference, the principle's identical. The important thing with these brackets is actually they have these additional sections. Here there are 4 of them, and these are little clips that the actual brake pads slide backwards and forwards in. And thankfully, when it comes to a new set, they're not something that you have to buy separately, as long as you buy correctly. So first of all, if you have bought a brand new caliper, it should come with a brand new set ready to go. So the second thing that's essential to mention when it comes to these caliper brackets is these 2 slider pins. Now, the way that these pins work is essentially they slide backwards and forwards, as we can see here on our brand new caliper. And I'll pull this out, just pull it forward, and we can see that we've got a nice clean pin. We can see the nice fresh grease on there as well. So obviously a brand new caliper, we know that this is all properly greased up. So let's take a look at fitting our brand new clips. As I said, if you buy right, then your calipers should come with these, and also the brake pads should, if you buy the right set as well. Now, it's important to realise with these, you've actually got 2 different types here. So you can see that these 2 are a pair, and these 2 are also a pair, and they're kind of the opposite way around. So you're probably wondering which side they actually fit into our bracket here. So the first way, if you look at it side on, you see this little top section's got a very square cutout, very even. and that's this square section that we have up here. So that tells us that that is the top of our clip there, and this part is the bottom. And then once we've established that, then it should be quite obvious, because if we were to put it on in this direction, then we have this part, and more importantly this little spring clip right in the middle. And of course we can't do that because the rotor is going to sit in the middle. And so it's very easy to tell that this one literally has to fit here. So we know that the top is matching the top, and the spring cannot be in the center. So this is where this one's going to fit. And likewise for the second type, again we've got the square section right here, square section here, spring to the outside, nothing in the middle. So that's how we set these up. And to fit these, the key is to get the top section fitted. So you want to get that lined up as square as you can, push that down, and with your other finger push the center right in here. You've got the clip either side, one here and one here, one here, one here. And what you don't want to do is put it on an angle on one side, because then you'll really struggle to get the other side on. So you want to try and get the whole thing as square as possible, and then push it down as flat as you can. Just be careful of this little arm that we have coming off of the spring here. If it pops to one side like it did there, just put it back to the middle, try and keep it nice and straight, push it down, and there we go. And if you take a look from the side, just make sure that you've got a nice even gap all the way around, and it's definitely seated correctly as far as it will go. That's perfect. So repeat that with the other three. So next we're going to be looking at undoing our brake fixing here at the back. And there's a tool that makes this job a lot easier, and that is this. This is a set of flare nut wrenches. And a set of these are really cheap, not this particular brand. We can pick up a cheap set of these on Amazon for about $13 or $14 for the entire set. And this really does make the job a lot easier. So again, we'll have links to those. Be sure to check that out. And the reason these are so useful is they've got this little slot in them, so you can actually slot that around the brake line and down onto the fitting like that. You can do it with a standard spanner, but it does tend to be a little bit more awkward. Like I said, these are so cheap, and it does make the job so much easier. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try and undo this. What we don't want to do is start it moving and then just keep twisting it, because what can happen is if this nut here, this fixing, should actually be able to spin freely around the hose that passes through the center of it. However, what can happen over time, again, you get a little bit of corrosion in there, and the two actually lock together. And so when you start undoing this, what you'll find is it's possible, if it sticks, that this whole pipe will also be wanting to turn. If it does, you don't want to just carry on, because then you can twist this pipe and end up snapping it off. Now before we go ahead and remove this, obviously we are going to lose some brake fluid. So before we do this, just go under the hood and check the level of the brake fluid, and just top it up, make sure it's starting on the max level. Now once we disconnect that brake line, we know we're going to be losing brake fluid. So it's a good idea at this stage to check the fluid level that we have here in the reservoir. If you can't see it very clearly, if you get a flashlight and shine it around the edges, you can usually kind of get a feel for where the level is. Give it a little bit of a wobble, you should see that level kind of shake as you wobble it. And I can see on mine, we're just a hair over the maximum at the moment, so ours is perfect as it is. However, of course, if you did need to fill it up, it's a good idea to put some blue paper underneath just to catch any drips. And of course, you're going to need a funnel, and ours is particularly clean. I've already cleaned it. If yours is dirty, as it says, warning, clean filler cap before removing. Make sure you give that a good clean. And once yours is clean, you can just go ahead, remove the cap, and then put your make sure you're using a nice clean funnel, and then obviously you can put a little bit of brake fluid in there just to top it up. Make sure you're on that max line there before we start. And once we get this removed, it's a good idea, if you're able to actually cap this off to stop the drip whilst you're getting the next thing ready to reconnect. One thing that I've found is quite good for this is just a little tyre valve, just a standard one from a car tyre, and this tends to be a perfect fit. So I push this onto the end, and that will stop that drip. Gives me a few moments whilst I'm working getting the other caliper ready. Now, it doesn't really matter, you're not going to lose all that much fluid. The new caliper's ready to fit anyway, so it's not the end of the world. We're definitely going to lose a little bit, but if you are able to cap it off, obviously that is preferable. And also, before we undo this, make sure you've got a drip tray underneath. As I said, we are going to lose some drips, and make sure that's not going straight onto the floor. Just give me a little bit more space. I'm just going to pop this out, this low speed sensor cable. pop that out to one side. Just got to remember to pop that back in at the end. Just to keep this out of the way, I've got a cable tie here, so I'm going to cable tie it around the axle, just to keep it out of my way whilst I work. So I'm going to start undoing this now. Remember, the thing to keep an eye on is whether this fitting at the end is going to spin freely around the pipe or whether it starts to twist the whole pipe. That's the key to undoing this. Got to make sure you're prepared for that. Okay, so the first bit of movement. That was on pretty tight, so we'll see. Okay. So now I want to see if it appears to be moving freely around the pipe or not. It's not too bad. It's sticking a little bit. So I'm going to put a bit more penetration fluid on there. Now I've cracked that open. Yeah, and unfortunately, it looks like you can see it's twisting that whole pipe. I'll move that backwards and forwards. Yeah. What I don't want to do is I don't want to force that because I'm going to start twisting this pipe. Yeah. Sometimes you can get away with it if you wiggle it backwards and forwards a little bit. There is definitely some movement in there. Now I've managed to free this up a little bit. As you can see, we've got some pretty decent movement in there now, and that's without twisting the pipe. However, on these brake lines, you can see we have these kind of coiled sections right here. It actually finishes just here, and that last bit that's exposed just a little bit is actually the flat pipe. So it's not like this, it doesn't have this kind of spring around it almost. This section down here going through the fitting is just a plain pipe. And what can happen, and it's happened here, is you'll kind of be able to rewind it, and this will come up and up and up and up and up. Then it will hit the bottom of this coil, and then you'll find that you won't, even though you've got movement in the fitting, as soon as you hit the bottom of it, that's it. It won't move any further, no matter what you do. That's a little bit annoying. That's why I don't really like these ones that have this this coil kind of spring bit on them. It does make it a little bit more awkward. However, we definitely have movement in this, and I've managed to do several turns on it, so it is spinning freely, but I can't undo it enough to get it completely removed. And this does happen fairly often on these vehicles, like I said, with this spring coil. It's not the end of the world, so what we're going to have to do is, rather than unscrew this fixing from the top, we're actually going to unscrew the hose from the bottom. So the plan is, we've got a clip here that holds this hose in place. You can just see it there. We need to get that removed first of all. That will allow this whole fitting to move through the bracket that we have here. So then what we'll do is we'll cut the caliper down, so we have the hose free, the hose will be pointing downwards. Then we can rotate the whole caliper, which is obviously going to rotate the hose at the same time. Then we can unscrew the hose from the fitting rather than unscrewing the fitting from our hose. So first of all, let's get this clip removed here. I'm going to get a large flathead screwdriver. I'm going to lever between the bottom of this circular section right down in here. That's actually the top of our hose, and this little arm here. And the way that this works, it has two arms that pass through on either side of our fitting. So you kind of got to move it from one side, then the other to pull the whole thing forward. So with that clip out of the way, this should be free. As you can see, again, we've got a little bit of corrosion holding this in place. This little bracket here has a hole in it, and that's what this is passing through. But as you can see, we're not loose yet. I'm just looking to remove as much of the corrosion as I can from around the base of the circle, which is the end of the flexible brake hose. Now we're going to grab our rubber mallet and tap on the rubber hose. This section of the hose right here, you can see ends just here. This is actually metal, so we can tap on this bit. This is not pure rubber, don't have to worry too much about it. That section there is what you want to be tapping. All we're looking to do is break this seal that's corroded up in the centre of the bracket. There it goes. So now we can see that it's free. We can actually move it slightly up and down as required. So now I'm going to cut the cable tie down, drop the caliper down in this direction, and it's easier if you have a second person to be able to rotate the caliper, because you may still need to counter hold this. You don't want to put too much pressure on this fixing up at the top here. If yours is a little bit sticky, needs a bit of convincing to get started, it does actually have a hex section just here on the top of the pipe. So if you push it down through the bracket a little bit, you should be able to hold here and get it started here at the same time. So as you can see, it's dripping here. Let me push it out just for the moment. Put my little cap on. There we go. So next, if you take a look at the bracket, in particular the hole that passes through the centre here. If you look carefully, you'll notice that it's a hex shape, but on one of those hex points, it's actually rounded rather than pointed. If you take a look on your brake line, you'll see that you have exactly that same shape. It is a hexagon, but with one curve instead of a point on one side. And the reason for that is when you put this hose up through this hole, having that means it can only go in one orientation. That's going to be the correct orientation to stop you twisting the pipe too much when you come to fit the caliper back on. And so it's important that we get that lined up correctly. Now, because we have some corrosion in here, I'm just going to grab my hook tool and just clean away a little bit at these inner edges. It was a little bit corroded getting it out, so I want to make sure that the new one goes in nice and smoothly. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes just giving this a bit of a clean up. Now, a quick tip for you to make this easier. We've had a look at where the curve section is on the bracket, and that's to the inner corner nearest the pipe. However, as we're rotating this, it's actually very difficult, especially when you've got brake fluid and stuff dripping down, to actually see where this centre is. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mark this outer ring here just with a file, just so we've got a very clear mark of where the middle of this curved section is right here. Now we've got a little visible notch just where the approximate centre of that is. And now you shouldn't have to do this, but because we're having to do the workaround because our upper hose fixing wouldn't fully undo, we're going to offer this back up. So it's very important that we know where this is, otherwise we could be juggling with that caliper for days. So remembering we had this little problem that we couldn't fully undo this fixing from the bottom. So what we're doing here is a slight workaround. However, if you don't find yourself in this situation, if you manage to undo this and it fully undid, then that's absolutely perfect. You won't have to go through what we have to go through here. So in that instance, what you do is you get your new caliper ready, you'd feed that up, line that up, click that in, put your little clip on it to hold it in place, and then you'd move this up onto the top and then screw it back on. However, because we have limited movement on this, what we're going to do is exactly the same as we did to remove ours. So we're going to screw the cable by rotating our caliper to get this as close as we can, obviously through the middle of this hole. And then once we've got as far as we can, that final twist, we'll make sure that we get it aligned properly, lock it in place, and then we should have enough movement in this to get those last couple of turns just to snug it up properly. So again, we're going to be using two people, one person just rotating the caliper as we get this done up. Don't forget to put it through the hole before you start. And one very important thing to remember is don't leave that caliper hanging from that brake line at any stage. Those brake lines are relatively delicate, especially compared to the caliper, so don't just hang the weight of that caliper. If you need to hang it up, get a cable tie and do that. I've got that about as far as I can by hand, so now I need to start snugging it up. So at the moment I'm going to use this on the bottom of the hose here and just do it that way. Remember to counter hold at the top, so I'm going to do it above and below the bracket again. Okay, so I've now got this to a point where it's nice and snugged up. And currently I've got my little notch here, showing me that the centre of my circle on my hose is here. And I know it's on this back corner is the rounded side on the bracket. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to undo the bottom hose enough so that I can get it aligned through the hole and push it through, because then I know that's probably like half a turn to get that back into place, and I know I've got more than half a turn available on our top fixing. So I've got that in the approximate position. Yeah, there it is. Slot it back in. So now I need to put that clip back in before I tighten this up. That clip all the way back in. So now I can go ahead and tighten this up. It's a good idea at this stage just to grab yourself a bit of blue paper, and you want to give this a really good dry off, especially on the thread here. The reason being is that we're going to test this later on to check that it's holding pressure correctly and nothing is leaking. And what we don't want to do is mistake any old bits of fluid or even penetration spray for being brake fluid. So make sure you give that a really good clean off. So I'm just going to hang the new caliper again up by the spring here, to get that out of the way for a second. So before we fit our caliper bracket back to the car, it's a good idea to grease these clips, because we want those brake pads to slide in and out of here nice and easily. And the best stuff for this is this. This is just standard brake grease. This is absolutely perfect. It's non-conductive. It's great with metal and rubber components. Makes it perfect for brakes. Again, there will be Amazon links to this if you need it. I'm going to get a little bit of my grease. I'm going to use a brush to apply it. And basically, we want to apply grease to this edge here, the entirety, all three sides of the little trough there, and also down here. So essentially, pretty much all of this can do with greasing. So from this side here, just a light layer of grease. Make sure you get it into those corners. Doesn't have to go on thick, just a nice even layer all the way around. So for refitting our caliper bracket, just slide it in gently over the rotor, and we'll look at getting these bolts through. That one started. Snug these up a little bit, not too much. We're going to torque them in a second. So grab your torque wrench, torque these up. 169 newton meters, which is 125 foot-pounds. So now brake pads. Here's the brake pads that we've got. These particular ones are Auto Shack. These are amongst the cheaper ones. Not very expensive at all. Again, two versions, standard or heavy duty. And prices in the kind of $20 to $40 range, depending on the ones that you're after. One important thing, as mentioned before, make sure that yours come with the replacement clips. And we will be adding Amazon links for both standard and heavy duty into the video description for you. And all of the ones that we'll link definitely come with these clips. It's going to make your life a lot easier. So let's take a look at the pads. Now when you're handling these pads, remember the faces are slightly absorbent, so if you've got grease and dirt, what you don't want to be doing is wiping that over the face. So try and get your hands away from the face of the pads whilst you're handling them. Now before we fit our pads, we're going to grab some of our brake grease again, and you just want to apply just a very light amount just to the ends here around this these edges just here. You don't want to get it onto the face of the pad, just on the edges. So be quite careful with it. Again, it's just that little bit of extra grease. You want to ensure that these pads can move as freely as possible in the caliper. We've greased the caliper and we're just helping it out a little bit further, doing exactly the same, just on the ends of the pads, just where they make contact here. Now on these little clips, you may find that yours also have like this little spring mechanism just here. So when we're fitting our pads, we want to be careful that we fit the arm of the pads in the gap between the inside edge of that spring and the end of that little arm. So that's where it's got to fit. And basically what happens is when the pads are pushed inwards, that little spring just helps pull them back out. So we don't want to put the brake pads in front of that arm. They need to be in that gap from there to there. So I want to fit these little arms. I'm going to do it at a slight angle. Making sure that I'm not going past the front. I've got to kind of feed them in front of the spring there. Same on the bottom. And then gently slide it in and straighten it up. There we go. There. And when it's in place, look how easily that moves. This is how brake pads should be. And just check that you've got that nice even motion top and bottom, which we have. That is perfect. So we'll do exactly the same with the other pad. So this next stage is optional. You don't really need to do it on these more modern brakes because they do have these backings, but I like to put a bit of the brake grease. Traditionally you do this with copper grease, but brake grease is kind of the more modern way of doing it. Just a very light coating just across the back here, just on this area that has this kind of padded section on it. Just nice and light like that, and exactly the same on the rear. So now we can go ahead and cut down the caliper. Again, be careful with your new flexi line there. Make sure that's not twisted. And then we can slide this over the pads. Now when you slide this on, you might find that your slider pins, you have to push them back in a little bit if the arm doesn't quite clear. Sometimes you've got to push them in. These ones were okay. So now I just want to line these holes up, ready for these bolts into the end of the slider pins. Remembering to watch this, we don't want this turning. And same on the bottom. So now we need to torque up these two bolts. So these are size 14 and this is 35 Newton meters with a torque wrench, which is 26 foot-pounds. So we've now essentially got our brand new caliper all fitted. However, we do have one issue. Remember that we've disconnected that brake line and we had all those drips of fluid. And as those drips would have come out, of course, they would have been displaced by air. So currently we have a certain amount of air running back up our hard brake line at the rear there. And of course, the actual caliper itself and the hose is completely empty. There is no brake fluid in any of that. So at the moment we have air in our system and that's not a good thing. So all we've got to do before we go any further is make sure that we've bled all of the air from this caliper. And the bleeding is done through the bleed nipple here. There's a little cap on it, but that's the bleed nipple right there. So what we need to do is actually attach a hose and something to collect that fluid as we push it through. So first and foremost, we need something to put the fluid into. You see this contraption's just been made with an empty pop bottle, complete with a piece of plastic tubing. The only bit that we've purchased is this cap. This specifically fits onto bleed nipples, and it's a great way to adapt from the bleed nipple onto your clear tubing. Again, you can pick these up on Amazon, and likewise you can buy proper kits rather than this kind of DIY setup, and they're not that expensive, so we'll add links for both of those into the video description for you. So first things first, I just want to hang this out of the way. I've got drill discs here, so I'm going to use a hole in the rotor. Now that can support itself. So the bleed nipple here at the rear of the caliper, they've usually got a rubber cap on, they should have. And so we want to make sure that we get that removed. So in just a moment we're going to be connecting this onto the end of the bleed nipple, opening this nipple up and pressing the air through it until we get the brake fluid. So at this stage it's very important that you understand the basic process of what we're trying to do here. And ideally you really need two people to help do this. You need one person that's sat in the car and they're going to press that brake pedal down for you, and you're going to be here monitoring it and watching that air come out, and you want to get that air flowing through until you get no air bubbles left, and all you're doing is getting a nice constant flow of brake fluid coming through your tube. Now one really important thing for the person that's going to sit in the car and is going to press down that brake pedal, remember when you open this nipple you're going to release the pressure in the system, and so you will physically be able to push that brake pedal all the way down to the floor. However, we don't want to do that. Remember, in normal operation the brake pedal gets nowhere near the floor. And the reason being is you've got a piston that goes through into the master cylinder, and that can get a bit of corrosion and gunk around the end of it. If you suddenly start putting a very large action on it, it's possible that can crumble off and end up in your brake system. So it's very important for the person that's going to sit in the car and press those brakes is not to put the pedal down to the floor. Just nice, short, sharp pushes going no further than halfway. And one other very important thing, when we get to the end of that process and we can see that there's only fluid coming through with no air bubbles in it and we're ready to shut this off, what you ideally want to do is you want to shut this off when the person's putting a positive pressure downward on that brake pedal. So it's good to communicate with that person when you get to that stage and you're ready with your spanner here, and just to communicate to the person that's sat in the car, give it one more push, ready, now, and then shut it off as they press that brake pedal. But before we start this process, there's one very important thing that we need to mention about the brake fluid. Let's take a look at that. So, very important thing to keep an eye on when we're doing this process is to make sure that we're not losing too much brake fluid. The reason being, when you're pressing that brake pedal down repeatedly and you're pushing that fluid out through the caliper nipple there, this is very slowly going to go down. And what we don't want to happen, we don't want this to run out of fluid, because if this goes completely dry, then the next thing it's going to be sucking in is air. And we most definitely don't want air going in from this side of the system. So that's something that we most definitely want to avoid. Remember, we topped this up earlier in the process, so we know that we started on the max level. We may have lost a little bit, so you're going to check the fluid level again. If you need to top it back up to max before we start the process, then now's the time to do it. Now, you might find that the bleed nipple is quite hard to move to start off with. If it is, just grab yourself a wrench with a bit, much easier than doing it with a spanner. So just loosen it off just a little bit, and then we can control it with the spanner from there. Now we're going to fit the rubber boot onto there. Make sure we've got a good solid connection. This is where we're going to watch the air hopefully changing to fluid relatively quickly. Then we're going to keep this until we've got no air bubbles coming through the system. So I just want to open this up a little bit. Now we're ready to start the brake pumping. Okay, let's go. Here comes the fluid. So we've got the air bubbles there at the moment. Making progress. So there's still a couple of bubbles in there. There we go. Now we're not seeing any bubbles now. It's looking good. That one, little one there. Okay, that's looking good. So now I'm going to start doing it up. You keep that going. Okay, and stop there. Just going to do one last one when I say. I'll say 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, go. Got it? I'm just going to tighten this up with the spanner again. You don't want to over tighten this, only in an aluminium casting. Similar to how it was about there. And you just want to make sure that you get rid of any fluid. So again, we're going to be checking this for leaks in just a second. Make sure that's bone dry. So now we've got rid of all of that air that's in this caliper, and we know that we've got just brake fluid coming through, so that's good. So the next thing we want to do is make sure that we don't have any leaks. We're going to do that by pressing the brakes. Now that the air system is under its proper pressure, now that this is closed off, we're going to check this for leaks. And there's 3 very important places that you need to check for leaks as we do this. First is around the actual bleed nipple here. Second is on this end of our flexi hose here, where our hose connects into our caliper. And finally, the transition between the flexi hose and the hard line. Need to make sure that we're not getting any leaks up there as well. So in a moment, what we do is get the person in the car to press those brakes down, and this will actually start to compact the pads and things that we have in here. This caliper will actually move, start to lock this space down, lock those pads against the rotor. And then once those are locked into place, then we have full pressure in the system, the brake pedal will firm up, and then we can see if we're getting any signs of any leaks. Okay, some short presses on the pedals, getting firmed up. Yeah, so the space is taken up. Should start to firm up a little bit now. Okay, stop there. Okay, so we saw the caliper move, so the pistons are now fully out, so all this is locked up nice and tight. So let's go ahead and give it 5 pumps on the brake pedal, please. Perfect. And now inspect these 3 areas very carefully, make sure you've got no leaks. So once you've topped that fluid in the reservoir back up to the correct level, you are essentially job done. However, it is highly recommended that at this stage, because we have opened those lines, that we do a full brake bleed. And that will involve the process that we just did here, but we're going to be doing that on all 4 calipers in a certain process. Now that is entirely optional, and we have filmed a separate video on that, and you'll find a link to that in the video description if you want to go ahead and do that. But with that optional step aside, that should be job done for your caliper. However, with any brake job, before you jump in the car and shoot down the motorway or the highway at full blast, really want to make sure these brakes are working properly. And the best way to do that is just slowly on your own driveway or road, just rolling backwards and forwards between drive and reverse a few times, making sure that brake pedal feels nice and firm, making sure you get good grab on these brakes. And if that's good, then take it for a short drive at a low speed just around your block. Again, testing these brakes, making sure that both the pedal and the brakes feel good. And when you get back from that short test drive, it's always worth shining your flashlight around those 3 points on the line, just to make sure that we definitely don't have any leaks. But assuming that we don't have any leaks on our hose, and that the brake pedal feels good and the brakes are working well, we can consider that job done. So thank you for watching, it's very much appreciated. Now please don't forget that we will have those Amazon links for all of the parts and the tools shown in this video, and you'll find those in the video description. And that is by far the best way that you can help support what we do here at U-Wrench. So please, before you leave us, be sure to check out those links. And likewise, it's always nice if you also be sure to at least hit that like button for us. If you want to hit subscribe, we've got hundreds more videos on these cars just waiting for you to take a look at. So thank you for joining us, it's very much appreciated. Please don't forget our Amazon links, and we'll see you on the next video.